Hello, friends, and welcome back to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and in this season, we're exploring the theme of sanctifying friendship. All of our guests this season are helping us to dig deeper into what sanctifying friendship means for us as individuals, as leaders, and for the church. So if you haven't had a chance to hear from Victoria White in episode 1 and Matt Rawl and Rachel Billups in episode 2, I hope you'll get a chance to listen. Today's conversation with dear friends Matt Russell and Cleeve Tinsley is one of those that I'll just say, if you're driving, you may want to save this and listen at another time when you can take notes or simply be fully immersed in the conversation. Because this conversation feels like an experience of the holy. This conversation gives us language and insight that sanctifying friendships are a work of the Spirit, bringing us together, pulling us together for such a time as this. And one little audio note here. We've learned that with holy friends, there is a lot of holy laughter. There was, in fact, so much laughter in this conversation between Matt and Cleeve that they would tend to mute themselves at various times because they were laughing and chuckling and didn't want to interrupt the other. So you might not pick up on all the laughter. I wish you could see the video because it's there and it's an important part of this lovely, beautiful friendship that they have with each other. Matt Russell and Cleeve Tinsley's bios are available in our show notes and on the episode page on our website, ignitingimagination.org. I hope you'll check that out because they both are doing amazing work. And finally, here's a poem by David White that pulls on some threads that you will hear in our conversation with Matt and Cleeve Tinsley. It's a little long, and so I want you to hear that it's worth the listen. We've asked our good friend and colleague, Reverend John Thorberg, to read it for us.
Friendship is a mirror to presence and a testament to forgiveness. Friendship not only helps us see ourselves through another's eyes, but can be sustained over the years only with someone who has repeatedly forgiven us for our trespasses, as we must find it in ourselves to forgive them in turn. A friend knows our difficulties and shadows and remains in sight, a companion to our vulnerabilities more than our triumphs, when we are under the strange illusion we do not need them. An undercurrent of real friendship is a blessing exactly because its elemental form is rediscovered again and again through understanding and mercy. All friendships of any length are based on a continued mutual forgiveness. Without tolerance and mercy, all friendships die. In the course of years, a close friendship will always reveal the shadow in the other as much as ourselves. To remain friends, we must know the other and their difficulties, and even their sins, and encourage the best in them, not through critique, but through addressing the better part of them, the leading creative edge of their incarnation, thus subtly discouraging what makes them smaller, less generous, less of themselves. Through the eyes of a real friendship, an individual is larger than their everyday actions. And through the eyes of another, we receive a greater sense of our own personhood, one we can aspire to, the one in whom they have most faith. Friendship is a moving frontier of understanding, not only of the self and the other, but also of a possible and as yet unlived future.
I am so excited about this conversation. Cleeve Tinsley, welcome.
Thanks for having me. So delighted to be here today.
And Matt Russell, my friend, so glad to see you.
Well, it's great to be a part of this again. Thanks so much for having us.
All right, let's just jump right in, you two. I want to start with the story of your friendship. How did you two become friends?
Cleve,
Well,
I'm
I
going to
mean,
let you.
how do you want to start? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Oh,
story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from my understanding, is our audience is mostly clergy or lay persons who are pretty familiar with the Christian narrative and story. And Matt and I's meeting really is
Mhm.
about ministry
mm,
outside of the institutional walls, and both of us pressing toward our sense of calling back in 2015 during what was called the movement of Black Lives Matters across Houston. Sandra Bland happened,
mm,
and at the time I was a graduate student at Rice, really grappling with Lisa, my sense of call, meaning what did my deep sense of Black spirituality have to do with this latter iteration of movement and this press that this community made toward institutional churches, meaning in what ways can you contribute to this movement given this new cultural zeitgeist, meaning at this time,
mm,
this is millennials are at a height during this time. And they began doing a couple of things. First, they began saying we have to be more inclusive in these movements. Two, no longer do we want a single cultural representative. And also, there are other cultural institutions within our communities that speak to the needs of specifically the poor Black working class community, right? And so for me, I began grappling. I'm an ordained Baptist minister at the time in graduate school studying religion largely. I was grappling with what do I do with this tension between wanting to be relevant to the new expressions and modes that were existing at this time, and also my relationship with at the time the Black Baptist tradition. But I started also engaging with Black Methodists as well, who were part of the UMC Church, and um, and so 2015-16, Matt and I are working simultaneously, but Matt is also concerned more broadly with social justice issues, and he done a large work around incarceration, and of course, because of his own, like mine, our personal experiences kind of shaped some of our engagement. So he was really engaged with the Latino community as well because of personal concerns, and we our paths crossed because at that time a lot of things began happening, right?
Mhm.
Alton Sterling, Philando Castile,
Mhm.
um, uh,
Yeah.
all this, and Dallas police officers, and then what happened? Religious communities finally say, "Hey, can't we just all get along?" To use the Rodney King phrase, right? Uh, and but there was a tension there. Like I said, Matt knew that there was a different way, and he's leading white progressive churches, United Methodists, and really the story is Matt's reaching out to, hey, who's speaking on these matters, and a group of United Methodists, prominent Black United Methodist ministers I was in conversation with, as well with a bunch of Black clergy in the city. Um, and they reached out to me because Matt was organizing a kind of vigil to have at St. Paul's United Methodist Church. And at the time, the Black community, but Black clergy was also, everybody was upset and angry, didn't have the
Mhm.
necessary vocabulary that they were interested in speaking in the usual ways. And what began to happen, I was reached out to and said, "Hey, Cleve, these are some issues here, some frustrations, but we don't want to speak on it." And I found myself having a conversation, and I said, "Okay, that's great, but are you sure you want me to speak on it? Because I have no stake in the game, you know." Uh, and I'm just gonna say it like I feel it, right? And something gonna happen. Matt arranged this. We had other tangential relationships. We both had bona fides in our communities for working, and so this was an opportunity for us to come together. We didn't really know each other. We knew of each other,
mm,
and this visual came, and it was a beautiful kind of disruption. I'll say it that way. And for Matt and the United Methodist community, it was a kind of disorientation. For me and my community, it was a kind of reckoning with Christian symbols and the Christian way of life. Um, and it
Mhm.
started. It forced Matt and I to have a conversation because he and I both are persons of deep integrity. So for us, it wasn't just about coming together to have one kind of vigil. We had to figure out what is it meant for us, uh, for divinity's sake, for eternity's sake. Why are we meeting at this
Mhm.
time? And can we do it in a way that upholds the humanity and integrity of how we move through the world. Because I think we both were interested in not just forging a solidarity representationally, but we also are persons who are deeply committed to relationships and to personality. And so we had to meet and have long conversations. And so I'll pause there and let Matt take it up from there. We had a long 3 hour wine meeting that wasn't so, it wasn't so pleasant. Let's say it that way, And I just and I'll yield to my friend, let him talk more about how we came to covenant with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wish I could say we met on a dating app or something, right? Because that would be like romantic, and it was really, to tell you the truth, is forged in fire. And I didn't think the fact that we're like in love with each other and have made covenant with one another is probably the most shocking event of my life. Um, for 1,000 different reasons. But one of those is, I mean, I was raised in kind of a progressive evangelical Methodist kind of movement where we were using a lot of words around reconciliation, right? And so I was really bathed in and really born out of this kind of reconciling movement, particularly when it came to kind of everything, race and gender and all of those things, right? So,
Mhm.
and so when Alton Sterling and Philando Castillo's murders happened, deaths happened, I think there was a real, I didn't realize this at the time, but really what we were doing in the white church was kind of wanting to come together with folks and kind of sing Kumbaya, not in that like that kind of grotesque of a way, but really that's what we were doing. I think we were
Mm.
wanting to hold hands with black folks and say, we're not the bad white people.
Yeah.
And so when I met Cleeve, I was really intimidated for a good
Mm.
reason. Not because he's brilliant and incredibly good looking, which he is in both regards, but but really because he was, and he'll say he was not beholden to anyone, which is true, but he was a part of a community that was liberated within their own black bodies and identities in a way I had never experienced. And they were using language in a different way, not to really make friends, as if friendship was going to be the change of the um, of of the dynamics of race in the world, but if people would join them in the trenches and put their own sense of self identity and reputation at at bay, and quite frankly, I wasn't sure. I was kind of hoping that we could play nice together in the culture, and that if everybody just kind of, like he had said, if everybody just kind of got along, the problem we had was that we just didn't understand each other. And if we all just were nice to each other, we could really, we could change some stuff. Well, um, that became an education for me. And really, my friendship really, it wasn't. I wouldn't. I think using the word friendship at this point would be too. It would not be the right word. Our connection at that point really was prophetic in some ways for me. I sat in that that vigil that we had at St. Paul's, and I wanted to crawl out of my skin. I think we had 700-800 folks in the sanctuary that evening, and there was a part of me that was just like, what the hell is happening?
Mm.
Like, what was happening up front was not what I had envisioned happening. We were not getting to kumbaya quick enough. and so, and what I realized, and I felt the Holy Spirit say this to me in a way that, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but I don't feel the Holy Spirit talks to me a lot. But I felt the Holy Spirit say to me, how does it feel not to be controlling the narrative?
Mm.
And I was like,
Wow.
it sucks to not, I don't like this,
Mm.
right? And so I felt like for a moment in my entire lifetime, and I had enough enough. Well, I think I had enough stupidity at the time not to know that we shouldn't be up front, that white folks needed to take a back seat. But what was happening up front was a liberated movement that I did not have one experience in, and I did not have language for, and I did not have access to. And I realized that the Holy Spirit was operating in a place that I did not know how to get to, and I was left behind. And this was the rapture, right? I'm playing church in a way, and the Holy Spirit wasn't in that church. The Holy Spirit was no longer in that paradigm of religious community, because we had owned it, we had operated in it, and we could control it. And it was really Cleeve and the community that he was a part of that poked a hole in that. And that lunch date the next after that, we got together. I asked him if we could get together. He had no desire. And that's the truth. I mean, you talk about having to pursue a man.
But before you go there, I want to, it's an important juncture I want to capture. Something Matthew mentioned that's very important. He talks about, which is right, about having access. That was the whole purpose, both of my presentation and also my colleagues who did a different ritual activity. We understood that the maintenance and securing of certain kinds of power, be it kind of coercive power or a helpful kind of authority, rest in who controls the discourse and who does the representation of such discourses. And so for me, intentionally that day, and I said it out publicly, I said, what happens if we take away the great reformers, Calvin, Zwingli, and Luther, and talk about instead folks like Con, Gutierrez, and other folks, and they be the starting point for shaping the kinds of discourse we have, right? This kind of historically oppressed community language being centered first. And then what if we also change the ways you're used to doing ritual activity? If it's outside of the kind of Protestant way of doing it, but it's still a ritual activity, still very much Christian, but it also centers martyrs from different communities, namely the Black community. Because we understood at that time that it's easy to have general discourse about marginalized communities. But here what this movement did really centered the two poles that is very most difficult to talk about, namely Black and white, right? We can get in the spectrum as what you want to, but these two poles are always going to be the most kind of antagonistic, And so that was a visible demonstration of it. But then the next day, I appreciate Matt for pressing in. Matt wanted to not just figure out what was going on, but something nudged him to say, hey, there's something more you need to discover. And that's what came to our conversation. Just wanted to kind of say that before we went forward there, Matthew.
Well, and this is incredible. I want to jump in because what you have just described, you've named all this tension. I mean, the reality of so many layers of who controls the narrative, of who has power, of Black and white. And I'm looking at two deeply committed friends. And so, and you've just described sort of the chasm and the tension and the discomfort and the reluctance. And so I'd love, draw me in with the pivot and what happened and how you moved from there to where you are now. Yeah.
So Matthew and I think what, 2016, 17, we over the years we used to describe it in different ways. Because the first couple of years we were very careful. We were very careful about let's say it the right way. But now in hindsight, we like, listen, it was nothing but God, nothing but spirit. I guarantee that's all I can say to you. There's no other rational explanation I can give you.
No.
Other than it was nothing than the Spirit of God that told us that we were covenanted together. That was our future, whether you can feel it now or not.
Can I say this?
Go ahead.
I think the Spirit had to tell Cleeve that, because I think that I was still under the spell of something that I thought I could do something right. I still felt like that I could have I could learn something. I could have the right knowledge about something.
mm,
The issue was that all of that for me and my background as a white progressive evangelical was that it was really a protective factor. And I think at that time I had really I'd been interested for a while about kenosis, about this idea of self-emptying. Really, it was about my own recovery that drew me into that. I didn't know that that
mm,
was going to be a precursor to the
mm.
addiction to power and status and money and
Wow.
everything else
Wow.
Mm.
that I had been fortified with, right?
Wow.
And so when I
Wow.
met and Cleeve had said, I'll have lunch with you, but I don't have time for white people and white friends because
Yeah. Yeah.
and particularly white church friends,
Mhm.
right? It
I
wasn't
don't want to
until
do
I
your
met,
work for you. Thank you. Do your own work.
well, it wasn't even that. It wasn't even that. It
Mm.
was like, it was the fact that, and I don't know if you've ever seen 12 Years a Slave.
Mm,
Mm.
There's a
mm,
scene in that actually that one of
Mm.
our friends helped me understand where where this black man was befriended by two white guys, right? And they wined and dined for this new business, and basically it was nefarious. What they were doing was
Mm.
really
mm,
setting a trap in order
Mm. Mm.
to enslave him and take him south,
mm,
and to
mm.
detach him from all of the things that all the liberties, all of this, his sense
That
of
he had.
family and community, all that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
one of the friends in our community said, we're very suspicious that there's
Mm,
Wow.
always an agenda
Wow.
working for white people. And it
mm,
always is not to our favor or to our benefit, or it's never mutual, right?
mm,
And
mm,
so I think that was a education for me to realize that I might be the nicest guy in the world. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
Am I involved in the effort of liberty and community? And that's not
mm,
just from a position of writing letters to the editor. That's showing up
mm,
and actually
Mm.
having skin in the game. I that was an
mm,
education that I
mm.
received in this relationship with Cleve in this community.
So
I
let's
think if I were to add, go ahead.
no go, Cleve.
I said I think if I would add for me, I think what Matt is talking about, there was this there was a there was a kind of a wall that I had built uh, for several reasons. One, because of a kind of even among the black bourgeoisie or those who like we have these conversations who
Yeah,
have cross pollination that most, let's say, white progressive Christians have discourse and relationship with. This is my own internal community critique. There's a danger of assimilation, right? To say, now that I have access to this, there's danger when anybody has access to power, but especially
Mm.
marginalized groups, because marginalized groups have never had this kind of access. And so even the most radical of those who might can speak the language will change when they get around a whole bunch of people who have money and access and privilege, right?
Mm.
Just so happened in this case, Matt chose someone who didn't care, right? Um, and the very first act he had to do for me, I said, before we can have any conversation, you
Mhm.
need to tell me about my friend I heard you messed over, right? And so for me, it was a kind of a radical kind of community commitment I always had. And I'll be honest with you, I think at the time, I also a kind of disenchantment even I had with my own black evangelicalism. Because for me, I was like, if the black evangelicalism is not working, not here,
yeah,
I might be on my way out the door,
yeah.
right? So in many ways, in hindsight, me and Matt talk about it all the time. If it were not for this struggle, because for me, I wasn't struggling in the churches anymore, not my churches, because they weren't
Mm.
speaking to it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in grad school and out in the community, right? I was like, I'm done because y'all not helping me. I said, but here's maybe a third way. Maybe we can unite somebody who else calls themselves Christian. Let's see if this stuff really works. So for me, it was the last test of theological orientation at all for
Mm.
me.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was on the way out,
mm-hmm.
right? Um, so those were
That's
important factors that came to it. And so this relationship
mm-hmm.
not only was about community struggle, but also was, in many ways was salvific uh, for my sense of faith orientation in the end.
Both of ours, both of
Yeah,
ours.
exactly. Right.
It's
We
a
both were at
mutual
the brink.
saving. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
think you were on your way out. I was on my way into deeper sleep, right? Because
Wow.
if the words of Jesus are about waking up, and my
Yeah.
Yeah.
religion had definitely put me to sleep, doing the right things, right? But
Yeah.
I was on my way to sleep.
Yeah.
And I think that our friendship woke me up. It's
Yeah.
waking me up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
I had just left like 2011, 2012. I just left an executive minister position at a large church in Houston, 20,000 members. And I was in grad school given this critical space to think about what this really means. I had practiced for a long time, but this new, I think for both of us on different sides, this new movement challenged us to think about how does this our religiosity, how can it be deployed in this moment in ways we see it being ineffectively done by those trying to maintain our institutions.
Yeah. So I want to get to sort of the church's role in this, but I want to stay a few minutes longer with just coming at this from your different places and knowing, I mean, we can look at all kinds of demographic research that says the U.S. is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, and we can go on, but what we also see is a kind of social sorting by social media and other, where we tend to hang out with, be friends with folks who look, act, talk, live like we do. And so I really would love to hear you all speak into, at the level that you are sharing, about how can we build friendships across these divides, and why does it matter, or does it matter? And certainly, obviously, come at it through the lens of your own experience and your friendship. But is there wisdom that you would offer to folks?
Yes,
Or even, is it important? Will you speak to that? Yeah.
no, it's very important. I think, and Matt has been able to observe from my perspective, a kind of constant critical assessment of how I do it in my own community, for instance. So we recognize our relative privilege as cis heterosexual men in these religious environments that kind of favor us to a degree, right? For me, though, I discovered I had a different kind of formative experience. Yes, I had the privilege of being a graduate student and going to PhD, but most of the my colleagues came from different kind of environments. They mostly came two-parent, black middle-class environments, and so they were very good at developing the vocabulary and language, but as it relates to kind of felt experience, the palpable experience that folks had, there was a kind of disconnect, right? Um, and even now, I mean, I'm recognizing later on that there's a major difference. Now I get it. Meaning, for me, there's different conversations I have. Say if I'm at a table with a group of black cultural elites, I am from communities that have similar provenances like me, right? There's a kind of empathic, not only engagement, but also understanding. I believe a kind of really spirit of knowledge that comes from folk who have these real experiences. This is why all the folks who are part of this liberation theology strand talk about why it's important to understand the experiences of folk on this, because though we come from the same communities, there are different black communities, different white communities, as long as we use these things. And unless we are able to kind of get access to all these different gradations of community along lines of SCS, along lines of all this stuff, then you're always going to be missing something, right? And what you'll discover, what I've discovered is the more and more I move, and there are several different communities now, especially in black communities here in Richmond, you realize that even within community, there are different stakes that people have, right? And so it's an ongoing lesson, So for me, what it requires is, how do I leverage the relative privilege I've had, not only as an ordained minister, but as a person who had education, but also a person who's from these environments who are most often neglected and not taken care of, right? How do I make sure I have access to the workings of these worlds? And so for me, and I think for Matt as well, I know for me, I had to make sure I surround myself with folks who had different experiences, different vantage points, but also I'm able to be accountable with. And so I don't move, Matt, to tell you, without a group really of black women who always hold me accountable to what I'm saying. But even beyond that, I hold myself accountable to a group of black community who have a different whole language set of communities. So it's important, and only I can speak for my community, and we've learned it largely in our cohorts and setting. But what I've learned is that if I am not regularly doing the work of Jesus, which is placing oneself, Jesus always took themselves among those called, quote unquote, the sinners, right? Unless we're actually putting ourselves, dislocating ourselves from our comfort and convenience, right? And not get so caught up at our places at different tables, then we can never really be transformative in the way we want to claim to be.
That's right.
And that's my own personal lesson. And Matt and I had a rough night on that start, but we also came together at the beginning of Trump's election, so that took us apart for about a month or so. You know what I mean? But so it was tumultuous.
Yeah. And I'm hearing the intentionality in that. Like you said, this is important, and whether you grew in that over time. I mean, I'm hearing that was part of it too, but also just the intentional leaning in to these places of discomfort and disconnection and tension, because you knew you would grow and be shaped. Yeah. Sorry, Matt, did I cut you off? Jump in.
No, I think that early on, one of the things that connected us is that we had mothers that were probably really similar in some ways.
Yeah.
I'd love for, I would have loved for my mother to have met Cleve's mother. And I think in some ways there was mother energy and connection in that way that I can't still explain, but kept me present in a way that really, I think, had benefit later. I also think that there was because of my Methodist roots, there was a social imagination that outstrips the ecclesial experience I had. And I kept wondering, like, when does this happen? When does the things that, we talk about as Wesleyan, when does that, or the gospel, when does that stuff happen? Not the signs and wonders stuff. I'm talking about a new world order, or social relationships ordered differently, right? And I kept waiting for that to happen, and being the person that that kind of was chosen by God as a white male person to help that, and all that kind of got disrupted in my relationship with Cleeve and in the work that we were doing in the city at the time. And so I think that, one, I was at a really tender point in my own spiritual development. I think Cleeve was at a different point. I think we connected at this space I still really don't necessarily have language for, but we leaned in at a place of vulnerability where it looked pretty invulnerable on the outside. I think that if we were to have passed each other and read each other's kind of, posture, I would have said, oh yeah, that,
I think I would add, I think we were both further refining and defining our sense of calling, what that meant. I think Matt touched upon it. I said it earlier when we were in England together. There was a image of Wesley and King, and for me, recently I had a chance to go to a prestigious institution in Black HBCU culture called Morehouse, and we were there, and they described it as a kind of Black social gospel tradition, meaning that I knew I came from a prophetic strand of Black evangelicalism. I need to figure out what it meant in this world today. Matthew, likewise, was connected to this deep social gospel movement, Wesleyanism. So there was a deep prophetic connection we shared. We didn't know how to get at it. We knew that something was missing. But most of us had gotten to the point where we were fed up with saying, hey, something has to change here, our God. Because if not, we don't know what we're called to. I just know I don't fit in that paradigm anymore, right? So we got to figure this thing out together. And what we did know is me and Matt, we knew all the language, we knew the theologies, we knew all of that, but we had to try to make it make sense in the world. And that's kind of where we were at the time.
Yeah. I love that when you're talking about your friendship, you're digging into your own soul wanderings and wonderings, your own soul struggle, and that was a place of connection, which makes sense. It makes all the sense in the world, right? It's how, when we get really real with ourselves, then we're open to these relationships. You two are two of the most creative, inspired, courageous people I know. And I would love to hear how this particular friendship, I know you both have lots of people around you and lots of relationships, but how this friendship has impacted your ability to be creative and imaginative. And can you draw a line from this friendship to thriving?
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I know I am probably fundamentally a different human because of Matthew, meaning uh, I've tested the boundaries of what it means to be a friend through my relationship with him. One, you couldn't have ever told me, one, that I have a white friend, but also to have uh, one of my best friends to be a white man. Not with the kind of upbringing I came up with, not with the kind of constant beating of back against the kinds of stereotypes for folk who have to move through certain systems. And as it relates to our creativity, what Matthew and I also share is we have these vivid, wild imaginations. We just refuse to believe that things got to be like they are, right? I mean, whenever we're together, we are literally kids. We say our kids are out, and we're in private. You wouldn't believe we are what the resume might says if you saw us in private, because none of that crap matters. We cry together. We just like throw everything well, and so I think our creativity is sparked by each other because we really do have soul partner to say, no, there's a different way possible. And we have somebody saying to each other, yeah, Cleve, I know you got 20 meetings. I'm like, yeah, Matthew, I know you got 500 meetings, but do you know what the really most important part of your day was? What? That prayer you had with your son when you walked with him. I don't care if you did nothing else today. That was most important, right? And so I think, our ability to keep each other's humanity lifted and our friendship not only being forged in fire, it forced us to kind of be vulnerable with each other. And I've never been more vulnerable with anybody than I have Matthew. He is my best friend. And men move through the world a bit different, especially those of us who have this kind of rigorous kind of and people think we're so rough together, rough and stuff. And but when we together, we are like kids. I mean, he is my best friend. He's seen me through most of my transitions. We talk about everything that we can't talk to anybody else about. We hate that we have to get a podcast before we see each other because our schedules are so darn busy that the only time we come together is we got to do something. Oh, we got to be there at the same time. Okay, see you then. Otherwise we playing phone tag.
You're
Um,
welcome.
yeah. So we appreciate it. So like we were excited about seeing you two, but really we're more excited about seeing each other.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And but I would say like I'm able to be creative. Matt enables me to be creative because he's one of the few persons in the world I realize no matter what decisions I make because of my sense of my commitment to my integrity of conscience, I know I have a friend who would understand that when nobody else would. And so for that, I love him to death,
Yeah.
I mean, I talk for days. I mean, this friendship really, it has saved me. And if part of that root word save means to make me whole, then I realized that, this friendship in my, the second half of my life has been probably the most important relationship besides my wife that I've had. And it has changed me. Cleve has a gift of faith. Number one, he's the best leader I've ever been around. He's an 8 on the Enneagram for you Enneagram nerds. And you know what? Most 8s that I've ever been up against are not, they're not nice people, right? And I think they're blunt instruments that are useful in the world. You just don't want to hang out with a bunch of 8s, right? Because they're not fun, right? And they've always got an agenda. And I hope none of y'all are 8s besides and Cleve is an 8 with an 8
There are
wing,
8 listeners,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. Well, go to therapy. So, but Cleve is the healthiest 8 I've ever been around in my life. And he is an 8 that's gotten connected to his childhood and to his kid. And as he says, we let our kids run around and play in a way that we weren't able to play when we were actual kids.
Mm.
And so we invite each other's vulnerability. Not only invite it, we almost summons it out of each other. And because of that, I trust this man with my life. And I trust that what he sees about the future in the church and what he sees about my life and the organizations that we're part of are true. And I think that we have what we bring, and then that Venn diagram about what happens in that watercolored area of both of our lives that I've come to trust, right? And so I'll check
Yeah.
things out with Cleeve, and he'll get hunches from the Holy Spirit to call me and to leave voice notes. And we have had a spiritual discipline of calling each other once a week and praying with each other. And summer has disrupted that a bit, but that's something that will be something we do the rest of our lives, because that's a place that we come together in. So I love the man.
It is such a beautiful picture. And you all have used words like, humanity lifted. I love that you lift each other's humanity, and that you summon vulnerability, and that you love each other. And okay, men, stereotypically, I get this, don't generally have these kinds of friendships. So I'm just going to go there for just a moment. And just say, we know this. There's been all kinds of research and conversations about the fact that men struggle more than women to have friendships beyond their spouse, those sorts of things. And so I would love a little wisdom, words of encouragement for men listening today who may not have a holy friend in their life. And I don't know if you have words of wisdom or, I don't know.
So I'll say it's harder, and I can only speak for mine. It's harder for some men to have to be this kind of vulnerable with other people. I'll say that. It's hard work, and I will say, to get there, to really get the kind of meaningful relationship Matt had, we admit first it was forged by fire, and we also will say, for us, it was kind of activity of spirit and God, right?
Yeah.
We'll admit that, but also we'll say the way to it is through a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Right. So we had to knock down a lot of walls with each other, and it took years of experiences that we couldn't curate ourselves. It required us. We're trying to forge a relationship while holding together communities that trust us individually, but not together, right? So, and then they trust us in our own community, be like, all right, Clay, you taking us over here now. If this failed, So we, in many ways, had literally put our lives in each other's hands, saying, listen, it's not just about me, but our relationship, depending upon it, is a whole community of folk who will follow me because they think I got the right heart. And so you got to realize any kind of betrayal on your side is more than just affecting me. It's affecting a whole range of folk who depend. And likewise, Matt said, listen, I'm bringing all my power and privilege to bear, my people in here. Now, understand they feel they're going to be sensitive. So, I'm going to get all kind of meetings and calls all night about what y'all say. So Cleve, I'm putting my life in yours too. I may get fired. You know what I mean? And so we bring all that together, and I also admit to you, our relationship, because of the dynamic of our vocations that we both, if you were to get us, we both say, yeah, we are thinkers, but for us, it's not just a kind of, for me, all of my thoughts are really just determinative of kind of conduct. How can I better move through the world?
Yeah.
The only reason I ever did a PhD was because I just had questions, but I've always been a reluctant academic in a strict sense of that. And I won't say that publicly, but y'all can have that, right? But I think for us, the coming together and struggling was through a lot of grappling with pain and loss in community. We've all both suffered a lot of loss as well. One door may open, but a lot of doors closed. We've lost a lot of friends. We've lost a lot of people who were in our corner. But through that all, we sat one time together at a coffee shop, and we made a covenant with each other before we even believed it, and said, listen, in the image of David and Jonathan, we think this thing is what this is supposed to be. And that was immediately attested once we said it.
That's right.
And so I say to folks, is like, you can have deep, meaningful relationship with other men, other Christian men. But the way through that for Christian men, I'm just going to argue, is always going to be through pain, because our faith doesn't fortify us and shield us from pain. But if you're two Christians called to bear a cross and die in this world, you got to be prepared for that. Now, me and Matt don't want to die literally, but we died a lot of deaths. You know what I mean? And so I'm just gonna say, two Christian men listening, you really want to be friends. I would say to you forthrightly that God is going to test that sense of solidarity and commitment, but also it can be the most meaningful thing in your life on the other side of that.
Nice.
Especially if you come from different communities. Let me just say it that way. Let me add that too. For people like me and Matt, Matt had this phrase when we first met called improbable friendships. 6, 7 years later, I know exactly what he's talking about because we were very improbable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I have a friend that says the miracle isn't that Jesus walked on water. The miracle that he was a man in his 30s that had 12 friends, you know? And I think that's a lot of times there's not, men and friendship is kind of an oxymoron. And I think it's because we early on are pitted to see each other as competitors. And we compete against each other and are taught to compete against each other our whole lives. I think often men's lives are collude in silence over their own wounds and pain. I think often men are governed by fear, and because of that, we have the tendency to step back from each other because we're each trying to compete for the same types of things, and we see then the things that we're competing against are limited. And if you get it, I don't get it. If you win, then I lose. And so it's set up in this binary. And because of that, we collude in silence around our woundings. And we have this kind of, we're raised not to speak, but to collude in silence. I think ultimately men's lives are governed by fear because of that. And so I think the anomaly is that when you have men that lead with curiosity and vulnerability, it's going against like what we've learned in our culture, and so it feels really odd, right? And I think partly what Cleeve and I have experienced is like my spiritual director says another word for faith is just risk. And we've had to risk putting each other's lives in each other's hands and walking in a way that both of us don't know. We have to let what we don't know lead us, which is what we're taught not to do. We're taught to be certain and to, and so I think faith says, no, actually, I'm going to put two people that don't belong together, that should have never met, that the world has actually engineered so that you would not meet each other. And if you do, you will operate out of these restricted roles. And I'm going to put these things together. I think this is what Paul was talking about in the body of Christ. And all this crap just comes down, and you don't relate to each other based on these things. You take each other's histories, very importantly, but you move beyond role-based ideas of each other. And that's where I think our friendship has deconstructed a lot of things for me in a really helpful way. So, yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's so constructed that Matthew said something important. We don't let too many of our weaknesses in on each other. We got to mask and try to guard in certain ways. And so it was slow, but more and more every year we've become closer and closer. The more we've been able to kind of let it down, and finally we just say, you know what, forget it. This is who I am, right? And that's the risk there. It's very hard for two men to be emotionally vulnerable with each other, right? It's kind of emotional intelligence register is a whole different realm for a lot of men, especially raised in our generation. I'm a Gen Xer, so is Matt, So for us, we didn't come up with a whole bunch of emotional intelligence register. We didn't have, in my community, wasn't no therapy around about sharing. No, wasn't there was no self-care involved. So, so it's different, it was a lot. Like the Spirit had to work through a lot with us, okay? We were both raised to be uber men. We got together. No, we're going to solve the problems, But that key kind of emotion, to be able to communicate an emotional register, to move beyond rationality, I think is the challenge of faith as well. To say, no, there are two souls here. And what is that soul's need? What is the soul after, even in this mission, co-mission you feel called toward? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You all have really painted a gritty, authentic, um, not easy path. I mean, you started in tension, you leaned into pain, you you stepped into vulnerability. I mean, woo! This is tough stuff. But this is Jesus stuff, right? This is what Jesus is
Yeah,
inviting us
yeah,
into over and over
yeah.
again. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so this is where I want to pivot actually and pick up on something we mentioned way back, but um, okay, so if the church is all about the formation business, if you will, about forming people
Mm,
to be a loving witness of Christ in the world, uh, talk with me about how holy friendships, and especially like you have described, are a part
mm.
of that. And what does that mean for the church? And what are pivots the church needs to make to lean into this?
I'm gonna let Matt take the first stab at that. Let me think a bit more.
Because this feels really important for the church. Like we can't just sideline this
Yeah,
conversation,
yeah,
right? This feels like it's at the
yeah,
heart. Yeah.
yeah. It does. It does. You know, first of all, I think we have to rescue the word holy back into the space of the street because often Puritanism and holiness or being
Mm,
clean and holiness or being righteous and holy are seen as synonymous. And I think that at the end of the day, holiness smells like sweat and feet and 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 at times puke, you know. But it's not pretty, right?
mm,
Holiness isn't the prettiest dude, at the gym or the prettiest girl at the ball or whatever. It's holiness is that thing that after everything's been burned down, you're still holding on to and you're going to rebuild
mm,
with, right?
mm.
And so I think the church often, I think in some ways the only reason that Cleve and I are here is because one, our the imagination or our faith gave us a hope that it could be different, but the iteration of the church that we grew up in impeded that. And so often that's why holiness happens outside of the church.
Oh,
Inside
wow.
of the church by it can't happen inside the church by its own design. And
Mm-hmm.
so often the church doesn't recognize the things that are holy because it's got its eyes on the wrong things. And it's counting things that shouldn't be counted. It's building things at the end of the day that aren't going to last. And it doesn't have in some ways, the spiritual vision, ocular imagination, whatever you want to put to that, to be able to see what's happening around them. And
Mm,
I actually think this stuff happens all around us. We just don't have eyes to see it or ears to hear it. And I think that my hope is that the church will dissolve itself into an organization that becomes what it's called to be, which is something that I think Cleve and I are hoping to be a part of, which is much more relational, much more shared resourcing, much more wondering how each other are doing amid the struggles that we're in. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I just listening to Matthew. I think the word there here. I mean, really, our churches just have to get back to its core, which is the ongoing struggle for community. It's the
mm,
Acts chapter 2 vision of having
yes,
being on one
Yeah.
accord, all things in common. If we just
yeah,
our churches now have lost that. It has lost its sense of really making sure no everybody in this community is okay because we can't
yeah,
we can't really extend our community unless we're being community with each other, if that makes sense.
right, right,
And so no matter what strategic plan me and Matt
mm,
may have for 3 and 5 years down along, the group of people that we work with, we fundamentally create a structure of care that the church that we are creating a community vision that we're supposed to be a part of anyway, right? So like even now, I mean, like Matt and I will tell you, no, we will never give up on the institutional church. Why? Because they have all the tools. They have everything is there. I mean,
Yeah,
that's our
it's
job,
there.
right? I mean, we're
hmm
gleaning from it. But what has lost is Matthew said it, we've made priority the things that are not the things that should be the priority, right? We've
That's right.
lost uh, the vision of really forging and doing the hard work of community. Holiness is in the struggle for community. Holiness is not like I keep myself.
Yes.
Holiness is being willing to pick up a brother when they fall down. It's it's
Mm.
it's it's enabling folks in their community to come and say, "Listen, I don't have this together, but we love you anyway," right? But more than that, that's the very people that God wants to be at the front is those
Mm.
who don't pretend to have it all together. We got it back to it. Now we're more about sanctimony, and
Yeah.
those who have
Mm.
Huh.
the kind of demonstration or at least a presentation of sanctimony, we put them up front. Well, no, I think the God's vision is totally different. It's saying no, to be holy is to be messed up, but appreciate the righteousness that has been credited to you because of Christ. And y'all working all this mess out together, but y'all gonna remain community. Y'all might have a lot of stuff going on internally, but outside, nobody should know that because you are a community that's going to struggle together.
That's right.
Now, I think if the
That's
church
right.
does that, gets back to that vision, just Acts chapter 2, then God can do
That's
the
it.
miraculous, right?
Just Acts
Yeah.
chapter 2.
Just Acts chapter 2.
Just,
That's
just
it.
that's
Just
it.
go do
That's
that.
all. Yeah. Yeah. We have a good friend who's a bishop in the church who loves the church, who says we have been engaged in a great exercise of missing the point. It
Yes.
says that about the
Yes.
church, right? And
Yeah.
so I mean that's part of what you all are pointing to, and I love this notion of redefining, re-understanding, recapturing our essence, our core of what holy means, not as sanctimonious or as sanctified or righteous or whatever, but
Right.
as gritty and real and connected to each other and
Yeah.
holding each other in
Yeah.
that holy space, messy as it is, right? Not all pretty. Yeah, it's beautiful. So we're asking all of our guests. Oh, go ahead, Matt. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the kind of holiness I was handed as a child actually impeded my ability to take risks. It told
Yeah.
me that risk taking was part of the problem, that I should stay at home, that it was
Mm.
almost like I was given a pair of white sneakers, at
Mm.
confirmation. And to the
Mm-hmm.
degree that I could keep my white sneakers clean was to the
Oh,
degree that I
gosh.
would be judged, right?
That's an
And so I was going to
image.
be
Yeah.
judged based on the lack of stuff on my sneakers. And I
Mm.
just wonder, as I look at this Jesus who had no reputation, that the church is really concerned about the reputation of Jesus, someone who didn't give two craps about his reputation. If really what it means is, how dirty can we get our sneakers? Like
Mm.
how can we get the muck of and that means we've got to have a new vocabulary, a new image. What is it? I think Paul and Jesus talk about this stuff all the time. I think that really, and I'll just talk about the white church, we don't want to listen to it because it means that we have to give up our own security. And
Yeah.
so I think actually we know exactly what to do, and now we're being involved in this kind of deep, willful disobedience where we act ignorant. We're not ignorant.
Oh,
We just know what it's going to
ouch.
cost us, and we like our pensions too much. We like our
Mm.
cars too much. We like our incomes too much. We like our reputations too much, right? And so we'll talk about pie in the sky and heaven all day long, but to actually
Ouch,
give a
Matt.
shit about somebody in the zip code next to us, right? We
Yeah.
don't.
Mm-hmm.
We don't believe in Jesus. We
Mm.
believe in our own security. So that's what I have to say about that.
Preach, my friend. Oh my gosh. This invitation to this hard place. And this is the invitation
Yeah.
that is Jesus's invitation to us in relationship with each other and the world. And one other thing that I want to say to you too, I mean, there's just so much I'm taking away from this, but I love that these words that you both have said, and I've heard you say it before. I'm not giving up on the church. Like there's just too much there, that God is still at work. And that's certainly how we feel at Wesleyan Impact Partners and Texas Methodist Foundation. Like we're not giving up on the church. We're all in. Like God is still doing a new thing. And so may it be so.
Yeah. Amen.
Okay. So we're asking all of our guests, Sorry, were you going to say something, Cleve? Yeah, yeah, for sure. So we're asking all of our guests this a final question. So complete the sentence. You know you're in a holy friendship when.
You know you're in a holy friendship when you can just call and cuss and the other person understands. I'll say this, and I hope I mean
There it
edit this
is.
if you need to edit it. But I say like Matthew tell you I am an 8, and so um, and my initial response to certain stimuli is not oftentimes thought through as I have been trained to think through. So I call Matthew often, saying a whole bunch of stuff I just don't repeat, and he understands now. He understands my language. He's like, "Yeah, brother," and he knows exactly what that means. I say it to say,
Yeah,
you know, you're in a holy friendship when you can be yourself. That's really it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, when
That's
you
so
can be
good.
yourself. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wow. I think you know you're in a holy friendship when you feel disoriented, discombobulated, um, and still summons to move forward. And then you find yourself in a place where you are loved more than you ever imagined. And it's like a paradox, right? It's like where you feel totally powerless and powerful at the same time, but it's not something of your own. Um, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think I think Cleve is right. I think cussing probably has something to do with it. Um, but like, but I also think like vulnerability, I think vulnerability and taking risks together, and then seeing stuff together that
Mm,
I mean, Cleve won't let me abandon myself,
mm,
and I won't let
Mm,
him abandon himself.
yeah.
There's something holy about that.
Yeah.
yeah. There's
Yeah.
something really holy about that.
Mm,
Well, Matt and Cleve, God has done and is doing a beautiful work in your friendship and in you
mm.
too and in your ministry. And I am so very grateful. And I pray God's blessing on both of you and your families. And thank you for spending time with us today.